Burgess and Bolton's weekly wrap-up.
So welcome everybody to this week's edition of Burgess and Bolton's weekly wrap-up, where we look at everything to do with the London market, technology, change, innovation, culture. And this week, we're starting to build up to the London Market Claims Conference. And so we're going to replay an interview from earlier this year with Jonathan Clark, formerly Claims Director with SCOR. And he's going to outline some of the issues and challenges in the London market, and we're going to just comment on that. But to kick things off, we have the news. And the big news this week, of course, is Emma Raducanu winning the New York US tennis championships. The weekend was just fantastic. You know, it was so uplifting. You know, we've been down in the dumps for so long, and it was just a real uplifting moment, I thought.
Yeah, it's amazing. And the story is just a great all-round story, isn't it? And she was extremely good at tennis. I mean, just incredible, actually, at that age to have played like that. I mean, both of them played very well, but people were saying, oh, my heart was in my mouth. But I actually didn't think she would lose. She didn't look like she was going to lose. Her demeanor didn't, if you can sense these things, she didn't look to me like she was going to lose that match, which was fantastic. And then she's got the sort of youthful, radiant, you know, no cares in the world type of personality, hasn't she? Which I think comes across so well and is a real contrast to her. I don't know if you saw her waiting for the match. She looked absolutely focused, like she was going to kill somebody. In the you know, the bit that they come into, and what's her name, Fernandez was there as well, sort of, you know, Fernandez was there. She was kind of smiling and jumping around, and Raducanu just completely blanked her. So I thought, wow, she's a piece of work, which is great. Fantastic though. I mean, great to see somebody just do that. And legit as well, completely legitimate win, really was.
Really, really good. So yeah, I was just wondering how much they're going to insure her arms and legs for now. And that smile, don't forget, that must be a marketeer's dream.
Oh yeah, and she happens to speak fluent Mandarin as well, so she's a dream for the Chinese market as well. I mean, in fact, wow, she's, you know, they said she'd be worth 20 million within a few weeks, probably.
Yeah. It's incredible.
Good for her.
So let's move it on. So you've got a bit of news. Well, it's Claims Service Volume Index.
Yeah, well, Volatility Index. So it's basically just to lead into our discussion and you know, past guest who's now become a repeat, but which you'll see in a second, Jonathan, is basically just to lead into claims and to talk about this volatility index, which has shown, we've tended to focus on the fact it has shown an uplift. So what this shows is that across all 25 insurers in the London market, what is the level of service between all of them, and does it vary? What's the variance or the variation in that service? And what a higher score shows is higher variation. So that's bad news. In other words, if you're a broker or you're a customer, you can't tell where you're going to get good service from. You know, it could be, and particularly when you have syndicated business, lead and follow, there's issues there, of course. So there is has always been a pretty inconsistent service across the board, although certain players are very good, certain players are not so good, but it's inconsistent, and that undermines trust. What I want to focus on is kind of pre-COVID and where we're getting back to, which is not even a great place there. The inconsistency is quite high. And it's not particularly changing over time. And this is the sort of bit of a theme leading into the conference, is if we are going to be a service industry, if we're going to deliver something new and different in future, and I hope that's what we do talk about at the conference, then I think that we have to see this going down. We have to see more players doing better, not just a rag bag of different players, some good, some terrible, because that undermines the industry and why, the whole kind of overall brand of insurance.
Yeah. And are there, I might have missed this, but are there particular, are these numbers broken down even further so you can see how they're being affected?
Yeah, you can see it's different in different markets in terms of where you get the volatility. This is an overall score on the basically on a net promoter score. So it looks underneath the the standard net promoter and says, how does the service move around? But when you look beneath this, I mean, I think there has been quite a lot of shifting sands as well around what matters. So if you look in the US, it's about communications. If you look in London, it's now more about communications and speed. So the kind of need, if you like, on the part of the brokers, the claims brokers who we interview, is to say at different times they're kind of saying there's different problems or there's different things that are driving us. Now, in normal markets, you wouldn't get that moving around very much. If you deal with the supermarket, you kind of know what you want. You want convenience, you want product range, and whatever that won't change too much. You want value or whatever it is. So that won't change too much because those industries are much more about, they've thought more about the customer. They're more consistent. There's more reproducible things. You can rely on the fact that your supermarket will typically have the products you want and the service will be pretty good in those places, and we don't moan too much about it, because it gives you what you need. If you compared that with the insurance industry, you'd say, well, it's a bit of a lottery, particularly if you're going through brokers, it's a bit of a lottery as to what I'm going to get. And that's the brokers too, they're experiencing the same thing. And it's because we haven't got consistency of basics on service, let alone good service.
Yeah.
So that's it's quite a big issue, I think.
Sounds really good, actually, because that leads really nicely into the interview that we're going to show now. So as I said at the top of the show, we're starting to lead up now to the London Market Claims Conference, and I think one of the things that we want to do at the event is kind of hit the reset switch and really trying to move the conversations forward and look towards the future and stop looking in the rear view mirror quite so much. So what we thought we'd do, we'd replay an interview with Jonathan Clark, formerly from SCOR, where he very eloquently sets out some of the challenges as he sees them in the London market, especially through a lens, the claims lens. And then next week, we have Lee Elliston, who is going to come in and kind of reflect on those key themes, but also give his opinion about how we're going to move forward as well. So that's kind of what we're going to do over the next couple of weeks. But for now, let's listen to what Jonathan's got to say, and then we'll come back and reflect on those thoughts. So here we go. So welcome, Jonathan. Delighted you could join us. Until recently, you were with SCOR until the end of last year, and previously president of the CII and president of the Chartered Institute of Loss Adjusters and many, many other things, and veteran of the London market. So delighted you could join us today. Perhaps I could start off by just asking you kind of what you see as the key issues and challenges in the London market over the next sort of 3 to 5 years. How do you see it?
Okay, thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, Ben. I suppose the thing that always strikes you as you look at London is it's a global marketplace, and perhaps that's a theme we'll explore as we look at one or two other areas. So I don't think there's anything new in terms of the issues and challenges, but let's just sort of pick up, throw a few out and see where they take us, and perhaps do a few more in a bit more detail. I think the first thing that I always see about London is it does need to define itself really clearly, and we see a lot of that work developing now. But there is more local placement. There's more capacity elsewhere around the world, and so it's challenged. So it's going to have a clear vision, and perhaps we'll come back to that to ride that out. I think the second issue, which again we've talked a little bit about previously, is we do need to innovate. The nature of risk is changing, and the challenge for London is developing new products that remain relevant to the market. And over the years, we know that's been a great success for London. We know when they first insured an automobile, I think they described it as a ship that ran on land. So it's a marketplace that's used to it. But I think the question mark is that still true today? Are we ready for it? COVID, I think, has thrown a lot of challenges to the market, and we're not on the streets. I think one of the great beauties of London has been that concentration, 52,000 people meeting each other on the streets, and it's those very informal meetings that have created a lot of the innovation and a lot of the thinking that we achieve. So I think my sense at the moment, and again, it's very trite perhaps to say, but the market has survived well what's happened in COVID, and now the challenge is to move forward. And I think that's the challenge that a lot of businesses are facing. We've crashed through some digital. We're all sitting here today working from home. I don't think I've been into the office for a year. But fundamentally, London is a collegiate subscription market built on relationships. And I really do see the challenge as to how we're going to take that forward as a new generation come into the market, being a real issue for us. Just another thing, I suppose, Brexit, not yet clear what the impact will be. I don't think any of us really know what the impact will be, but it's sitting in the wings. Talent, we've got an aging workforce. It's been well reported. I think it says something like 26% of the people in the marketplace are over 50. We have seen a lot of people retire in the last few years, but actually we needed new skills. And we talk about experience. Some people have one experience 1,000 times, other people have 1,000 experiences. We're going to need some new skills. And we're very fortunate there's some great new talent coming into the marketplace. But we're not an algorithm-based marketplace, pure and simple. It's about the skills and about the way that we work together. And I think, again, that's one of my concerns about how will the market bring people together in the right way. Broking mergers, big broking mergers going through now. Big question mark, who owns the client? I think, again, one of the challenges for the London market is that client intimacy. Very difficult to get in the corporate risk sector, in that big commercial sector, but very critical. And has always been an issue for the market, and I think it could become a bigger issue. And then I suppose expense, that's always there. But I think we've seen some really positive things around delegated authority that seems to have worked for us. But perhaps the last issue I'll just sort of throw out is about parametric products. An awful lot of discussion about systemic risk, an awful lot of discussion about how we could provide services for it. And if you look at some of those parametrics and you listen to some of the risk managers, particularly when you start to listen to some of the CFOs, looking for simple triggers that generate some money for them, that allows them to have a well thought through trigger that works well for them. And I'll be interested to see where we go on parametrics. And again, being close to some of the development, been very fortunate, but that seems to be another issue for us as well. So kind of quite a few things there probably on the table. I don't think anything desperately new, I'm afraid. I think COVID has changed the landscape markedly. And I don't talk about a new normal. It's about adapting. But I wonder if it's slowed down some of the pace of our innovation, because the key emphasis of the market is that ability to walk out the front door of your building, walk into a broker, meet a service provider, be with your underwriter walking across to talk to a client or whatever. And we're struggling to manage that efficiently, I think, and in a constructive way. So it's a bit of a ragbag there, but I hope nothing untoward, but certainly some issues that I see there.
So, Jonathan, I hardly know where to start. That's like the encyclopedia of issues facing the London market. But if I started with my view, which is that, right at the heart of everything is it's a market, it's competitive, and the competition is, about, for me, and certainly the data that we see is about consolidation. You've talked about the broker consolidation, and also at the other end of that's, in a sense, the very big players getting bigger, but then also a number of specialists coming in who are these supposed innovative new breed or whatever. So we'd love you to comment on that. And then the idea, I think, and I think is really interesting, is just, as you raised it, who owns the client and whether there will be a sort of competition for that, or whether there will be collaboration, because it seems to me that that debate has accelerated, and to some extent the distribution chain might compress if technology allows that to happen. So there's a lot of things that could happen in the competitive space, isn't there, going forward?
Yeah.
And I wonder whether we talk about acceleration, whether those things, you could see those things changing and what it would be.
Well, I think that, okay, so I think that let's just sort of pick up a few of those, Ben. I think firstly, and perhaps take us into sort of slightly different thing, I think London has to be very clear what its purpose is. And it's describing itself in its vision as, you know, the leading global specialist commercial reinsurance market. But what we're seeing from the innovators is starting to pick up elements of that value chain and starting to target more thoughtfully individuals. And I think what we're seeing from most of the innovators is they tend to be a little bit more monoline than we used to. Very, very intimate towards where the clients are looking to be served. And perhaps we'll come back to that theme, because that seems to me ultimately one of the real sort of challenges for a modern London is we have to stop selling and pushing product and start actually serving our customers. Yeah. And I think what you see from the innovators is that they all understand that that is an absolutely critical dimension. And sometimes I feel, and we've talked about it at previous events with the insurance network and other places, do we occasionally lose sight of what our purpose is? You know, and our purpose is to serve customers and to listen to where their risk issues are, and then to work collaboratively, because the whole key to London is being able to get that capacity from a subscription market. And so, again, I think you're right. We have to think about what is competition and what isn't competition, Ben. You know, I think one of the themes that we said in one of the events that we're at is that leaders have got to lead. And that also comes of leaders have to lead by understanding what competition between leaders is. And it's a very tough gig, but leaders have to get close to their clients. And leaders then are competing for clients. We're all competing to sell our capacity at a keen price to a client who wants to buy a useful service. But I think going back to your central point around innovation, for me, all of the innovators that we can see coming in focus on a particular need of a client, understand that need, and then develop bespoke solutions for those clients. And that's where London was so strong and has been so strong throughout its history. But the innovators are starting to really push on that. And we're seeing some really interesting things going on, whether, you know, in different areas.
Could I just ask about kind of the overall vision for the market? Because you're right, it's a straightforward sentence. They want to be the number one marketplace, but I think the problem I've got, and that touches on some of the issues that you've raised, is actually that's the ambition, but how are we going to get there? And that just seems to kind of fall over, whether it's market, central initiatives or whatever. It always seems to, the vision's there, but how do you get there? We seem to get bogged down in the mud. And then you come back to all your points about innovation and talent and having the right skills and capabilities. But if the vision is presented, but the roadmap isn't then delivered or presented alongside it, it's very difficult for those organisations involved in London Market to build up a head of steam and go, right, we're on a trajectory, we know where we're going, we've got a plan, let's go for it. I just wanted to get your thoughts really on kind of that stickiness between we seem very good at creating the vision, but not very good at actually getting on the road and doing it.
Yeah, it's good. It's interesting, Jeremy. I mean, I tend always to come a little bit away from vision back to purpose, because although you can argue it's a bit semantic, if you get lodged in people's heads what you're really here to do, then I think you start to execute significantly better. I think people have struggled for many years with a vision because it kind of sounds a bit ethereal. It's about 30,000 feet. Whereas if you say to somebody, your job is to work for clients, make sure they can have an insurance product that's meaningful and will settle their claims when they have them, you start to take it down to a level that people understand. And I think, one of the things that I understand, say in claims that we're doing is, we're there to help people when bad things happen. The intention of an insurance product is to help people when things that they generally didn't select to happen. And we know that's a little bit trite. But I think sometimes if you give people a purpose, they're more likely to work together. Now, that's a naive thought, perhaps. But we've always struggled in London because we mistake competing with each other for the competition that's out there. And I think ultimately, at some point, what we're seeing now is a transition where people are recognizing we're in a global marketplace. If we want to compete, we have to compete collaboratively. And we have to become collegiate in the way that at various points in our history, we've managed to be. But I think to your absolute point, Jeremy, I wonder why it is that we always focus on collaborating about technology and not about culture and not about attitude. Because I think if we started to tackle culture and attitude as the really big, as our big competitors are doing out there, then I think we might well start to see people recognizing purpose and the ability to change and move. But and I would say that's been what I'm noticing as I've traveled around the world, that's a real driver. And I don't think that may well be the one that you expect to be there. But I think culture and attitude are ultimately where we've got to go, because we have to get a realism about delivering and about working together. Otherwise, it gets a little bit tricky, doesn't it?
Yeah. So I completely agree with you, Jonathan, on purpose, and I think you need a belief, and I think great organisations always have a central belief, and that is permeates everybody from the top down. And I somehow think we've lost that a bit in the insurance market, because to Jeremy's point, we end up, it seems to me, always fiddling around with the technicals in the small circles, looking at the big circles. And some of the things that we've seen coming out, I think they're getting better. But Blueprint, for example, we talked about it on the show a lot, and my criticism always of it, my critique of it, if you like, was, wow, it's just so much talking about technology, as if almost technology is an end itself, or data is an end in itself. And then somewhere on page 33, and it says, of course, this will make customer experiences better. But I was just going to talk a bit about that, because I think you have to do a lot more work than that to make the customer experience better, and a lot more intellectual depth than just saying they want it quick or fast. And look at the great organizations, they really understand their customers. And I think that is the constant, and that's the one you have to focus on, as I guess you do too. Do you think, though, that, and I've just gone on a bit there, but my question is basically, with the merger of Aon and WTW, you've got two massive organizations. My hypothesis is they're going to have to compete around the customer, because that's what they represent. And in the end, it seems to me that will change potentially everything, because we've all got to fall into line behind what Marsh and Aon decide. That'll be smashing each other up around the brilliant customer delivery. And then Mr. McGill as well. Yeah.
Well, and I think, Ben, you're right. If you look outside the marketplace, look at what the great leaders in personal lines have done in terms of developing intimacy to their customers. Look at, perhaps we won't name it, but look at something like LV, the way they communicate. Yeah. If it's going to be a cold freeze, you get a text telling you to turn your heating on. And although that may sound, you say, oh, actually it's nice, but actually it's a risk. They're thinking about risk. And I think that what you're seeing in the motor arena and the personal lines arena, we haven't picked up well in the commercial arena, because we're an intermediated market. Yeah. And so we've always said we'll be intimate to the customers, but how many of our leaders meet their customers regularly? Now, I was very privileged at SCOR. I met a lot of our customers because that was the nature of our business. But when I talk to colleagues around the market, that's not what they're doing. And I think that we have to acknowledge that the brokers will, not unreasonably, bring the customers closer to them, because they want to look at them around their risk profile, and we'll come perhaps to that in a moment. I think that London has to start to focus on risk as much as speed of service and so on. It's very easy to be obsessed by speed of service, but I've always sort of said, which would you rather have? Well-trained, good people with bad systems around them, or people who don't know what they're doing and really good systems? And if you look at the experience of somebody like a First Direct, the internet bank, but now telephone bank, etc., what they've worked out is speed isn't the key thing. It's delivering you to the right person. And I think that's one of the things I'm really pleased to start to see in the Blueprint now, that from a claims perspective, we're starting to talk about triage. And that's taken us a long time. ECF is fabulous if you want to, but it doesn't focus on the thing, which is to get the right kit of parts in front of the right person to make a decision. And I think one of the sort of challenges, and I'm just picking up your point, if I may, about data for a second. I don't think data skills alone are enough. What you've got to have is the ability to ask this really key question: what's really going on here? And for me, the challenge of the claims blueprint is to make sure that when that notification comes in, it's put in front of somebody who has the skill, the wit, and now the toolkit in front of them, the policy, all the stuff done to say, well, what's really happening here? What is it that's impacting this client, and what's going to impact their business, and what can we do about it? And I think that's, for me, key. And so that may not be quite where you are, Ben, but I would say that's the question to ask all the time: what's really going on here?
Yeah, and I had an interesting debate about this somewhere else, which I won't bother with boring people on here. But actually, one of the things that came out of this debate was actually there are different types of people you need to look at data. There are people who are excellent manipulators, what you might call data scientists. There are people, for me, who are then great interpreters of data, who can look at data and read between the lines and make judgments, as you say. And then I think there is a group of people, and this is something you have to do with data, where you have to say, how do we present this and how do we show it in such a way that people buy into it or engage with it? And those are sometimes the same person, but I'd say very rarely, because I think those are different skill sets and different capabilities that are naturally in people. But sometimes we talk about data scientists as if there's just this one person who can do the whole thing, and I don't believe that's the case.
No, well, I think you're spot on. I think that also comes to the question that Jeremy's raised about the vision. How do we actually really get down to it? Well, firstly, we've got to be inclusive. We've got to recognise that the new world skills we need, data people do not come in one size. They may well be very different to many of the people that we've traditionally been used to working with. They may not wish to come to work in a suit. They'd quite like to, whatever it might be. But they will be different people, and we have to learn that lots of different backgrounds, lots of different attitudes are needed in that new world. To your point, Ben, absolutely, because data scientists come, in multiple sizes. So, the actuaries, the brilliance that they've got towards somebody who can just look at data and say, hang on a minute, what's happening there? And I think that that's the skill. Really quality underwriters have been able to look at a presentation and really get to the heart of that's where the risk is. And that was a skill that they had. Now, as we enter this new world, I think we've got to build that skill. And I think it's absolutely spot on. But it means we've got to be very inclusive of the skills we're going to be drawing in. And again, I think we are behind the curve on technology. And if we're going to work on technology, we have to have people who can get the best from it. And again, that's very easy to say, but it's more than just, can I analyze data? It's about how can I really use this technology? And I think this cuts to some of the point you're raising there, Jeremy, about why don't we get things to happen? It's because perhaps we overthink it sometimes, but we need people who are really good at getting the best out of that technology and who understand and then have a senior enough role to be allowed to do it. And then I think the sort of, as you start to look at that, then you start to build a more compelling story for movement. But I think I agree entirely with what you're saying, Ben, but that it is about data needs to be analysed in many different ways. And we are going to have to look for people that are good at doing that.
So that was a really great interview. That was the first part of the interview. We might play the second part or clips of it later on. But for me, what struck me anyway was Jonathan, at the beginning of the interview, spent 5 minutes talking about the fundamental challenges as he saw them. But then when you talk about the solutions, it very quickly comes to understanding what the purpose of the organization is, and then the role of people in achieving that purpose at a very individual level. So you can see and you can almost feel and touch, what you're doing has an impact and what the overall purpose of the organization is. And and we've talked about the blueprint. We talked about the blueprint in that interview as well. And I just think it kind of lacks that kind of soul, that real deep purpose. And I don't think it would be too difficult to go back and try and find its soul.
No, I think so. One of the things, if we're cutting to the chase on this, and I think we should around claims and pre the conference and up the ante. I think one of the things that is really, really important when we're talking about failing businesses or markets is management and leadership. It is, in my view, every single time it is down to leadership and management as to whether it can achieve these things. And I think we don't, at a lot of the conferences, we hardly ever talk about management. There aren't any, sessions particularly about are the leaders any good. There's a bit of a sort of, let's not talk about them because they're all important people. And, actually, let's call them out. I think there is, not the individuals necessarily, but there is a need now for better management. There's a need for those people to set out that purpose, to set out what's required and what needs to happen, and then to support the people within their businesses who want to do those things. Because if you, as I said, I think if you keep on doing the same old thing and expecting a different result, that is just, the pathway to failure, right? We know that. So I think that's the kind of first thing for me. It isn't going to be coming out of a blueprint document from Lloyd's. It isn't going to be coming out of, LinkedIn, we all met up and had an awards ceremony and all that. That's not going to do it. It's not going to cut it. We have to have much better behind the scenes. We have to be a serious industry. I think it is a serious industry, but I just don't think it thinks hard enough. And the reasons, I think there's one particular reason for that, which we've talked about: culture, complacency, all those sorts of things. And that comes, I think, from the fact, John Muir talked a bit about this, about, he said, well, why was I a person who was resistant to change? And he said, well, because as far as I was concerned, it was just disruptive to my nice existence. So I wasn't thinking. And I just want to quote a bit. There's a guy called Theodore Levitt who did a lot of writing about markets. And he said that, if a market is growing, then people stop thinking there's a problem. They stop thinking altogether, right? They stop thinking about the customer. But if it's not, if it's failing, they start thinking hard about what they've got to do to fix it. And if you take that analogy or that point and apply it to the insurance industry, in a way, at any given time, one part of the industry is kind of winning and one part is losing as it's depicted. Or, as we've got at the moment, hardening market, the carriers are doing well. So they stop thinking almost. And I think Andrew McKee made this point. He said, it's not just because rates are going up doesn't change the problem. It's still a problem. It's just that you bought yourself a bit of time. And so what we have been talking about, and Levitt says this, he said that, growth or mass production or reproducibility or purpose or service, whatever we're talking about here, it said it must always follow hard thinking about the customer, and he says that that's what's going to happen. And I think that's what we've heard over and over again with people we've had who have been the good people on this show and elsewhere, and we see it too, is that in the end, let's really go to the customer and stop doing the same old thing from within the industry, from within the technology, from, the structure, the wiring diagram, the pipelines. Those things are not the things that will change this. Management will change it ultimately.
Yeah. And a key thing for me within that is communications. And I think we talked about this a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about brand, and the thing about communications is it's two-way. You need to have the customer in that communication loop, because otherwise you cannot come up with a proposition that is client customer orientated.
No.
And then you have to have the skills and the buy-in of the organization to then communicate that down through all the layers to all the tiers, so that everybody gets it, understands what you're trying to do and what service looks like for your organization, because it doesn't have to be the same for every organization.
No, absolutely not. And I look, you're right. And the reason people bang on about brand is because it forces you to think hard. It isn't just a bit of colouring in or a logo. It is much more than that if you get a brand right. And I think people would agree if they saw what Coca-Cola does and Unilever does and Nike does and Google does. That's why that's important, because those are they signify that business has really thought about its customer to the point that it protects its logo, it trademarks all those things. It's really thought about what its promise is about. They call it the promise, the brand promise, but that's about trust. It's about every time I go there, I can be sure that that's a brand. And we all go and buy trainers or whatever, and we just glance at the brand. And if it was a no-name brand on the trainers, you'd go, "Ooh, I don't know about that. I'm just not doing that," because you've got so used to it. It's second nature in those markets since beginning. So I think brand is a great signifier. I keep using that word, but it is a good word of signifying that a business is really thinking, and it's also put itself out there. It's made a promise, because if you go to any of the websites of insurers that have got a good, strong brand, there's a narrative about what they're going to do and why they're going to do it, and they measure it, and that's the point. So it gets you beyond the sort of non-thinking, let's go for short-term sales, let's build up this and that and the other. It's the long-term thinking about the customer and the promise and what you deliver that really matters. And I think that, again, is really key. But it's back to whether management supports brand, whether management and believe in all of that sort of thing, or they're just in for a quick buck.
Yeah, and that brings me on to the final point around kind of culture and attitude, I think. So and this is something I think we're going to try and focus on really hard at the conference, because this is the tough stuff. This is, as Jonathan said in the interview, we quite often jump in straight into the technology, the process, the blueprint, whatever process needs fixing, but without thinking about, well, what is it that we're trying to do, and then how do we get our people to buy into that and create a culture around the customer and have an attitude. And he talked at the beginning about innovation, to have those, that space for ideas to come to the surface and be tested. And we've talked about this before, and you have, Ben, about, technology is an enabler of that now, because it's relatively cheap. You can run it. If it doesn't work, you can quite easily throw it away. It hasn't cost you £1 million. And so I just think it's a massive opportunity, and something we're going to really try and push hard at the conference, to try and get people to share their challenges around changing culture. And then if we can get a conversation like that going, I think then we can start to build a bit of momentum around what does change look like, how does it feel within organizations, what are the buttons that you need to press to be successful.
I agree. And I think I'm starting to work with some teams who you challenge them on their thinking about what they're trying to do and achieve, and they push back and they say, no, that's what we really believe. And I was working with a team yesterday, and I won't say what they were talking about, but it was a very interesting idea, which would become their purpose. And they were all as one on this idea. And I said, so where does the basics of claims service, for example, fit into that? And they said, look, it does, because it's a byproduct of this, of us acting and behaving like this. And that's really refreshing, and it's exactly what you do, and it changes everything, because it's about belief. And of course, they're very well supported, this team, and they've got the management on side and things, and that's the really key as well. So it can be done, but it's hard work. It's not easy. And it doesn't come from, young, bright sparks walking in and think they could change everything. It comes also from the experience and let's really turn this on its head. And the other thing I'd say is just, it's about thinking about stop thinking about this as a kind of operational factory. Move away from the operational mentality, which is most of what the industry is, particularly in claims, and move into the customer-centric view and say, I will live there, and we will the rest will take care of itself. I mean, Jonathan made that point very well. Is execution is far better when you've got a purpose.
Yeah.
Because everybody knows what they're supposed to be doing and why it matters. You know, I've just gone through this with my own business, and we've just talked about all the projects, all the little bits and pieces, and say, why are all these things important once we've got the overall idea of what we're supposed to be about, what we're aiming for.
Yeah.
And I don't think it necessarily matters you call it vision or purpose. I take the point that it can be different things for different businesses, but manage it, you know, really manage it and really think about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's that's what we want to talk about.
Definitely. And so we're going to pick up these themes next week with Lee Elliston from the LMA. He's going to be speaking at the conference. So this will be a good insight into some of the themes and potentially, some of the challenges that we're going to try and tackle over the course of that day. So that will be good. Okay, Ben, let's wrap this up. What are you doing this weekend? Anything good?
Yeah, I'm going cycling with my son, so that'll be good. That's about it, really. Barbecue, I think, and so bit of a chill out weekend. Been busy.
Super. Well, if you're at a loose end, I'm running something called the Strawberry Tea Party, which is in my village. So we in Kent we grow the strawberries from Wimbledon, and they very kindly donate a bunch of them for us, and we have a strawberry tea party, and all the proceeds go to keeping the church roof on. So it's all quite Vicar of Dibley.
Very nice.
So, it's a lot of fun. But sounds
good.
Yeah. So we'll be doing that on Sunday. So fingers crossed for the weather.
Take some photos and show us next week.
Yes, I will. That's a very good idea. Good. Excellent. Thanks very much for tuning in. Tune in next week when we got Lee Elliston on. But have a good weekend, everybody. Bye-bye.
Cheers, everyone. Bye.
Burgess and Bolton's Weekly Wrap-Up.